immediately coming out of the pandemic, they had that intelligence, and as a result of that, their sales bounced back quicker than any of their competitors. And that's how brands thrive, and that's how brands grow.
Hello there, my name's Johnathan Dudley, partner in Crowe, and as part of our Art of Thrival campaign, we're having a series of interviews and discussions with people who can help businesses through hard times. Today we're focusing on the retail trade, or effectively dealing with customers and brands, and I'm here today with Debbie Newbould of Flume. Debbie?
Hi.
Perhaps you'd like to introduce yourself.
I will. So my name's Debbie Newbould. I'm the Managing Director of Flume. Flume is a market research agency. We are here to make brands easier to think of, use and buy. And effectively, what we are all about as a market research agency is to understand what people think about your brand.
Life's tough at the moment, and if we look at sort of one or two brands that have struggled recently or even failed recently, clearly there are some lessons to be learned. And maybe it'd be good to get your comment of the failure of Wilko. Who's a big brand. What's your take on that?
I think that's really interesting, Johnathan, because I think it's a classic case of the brand not sticking to what it is all about. For example, there's a lot of other companies that do what Wilko was doing, or what I perceive Wilko to be doing, which is selling a lot of stuff in lots of different sectors and really fairly cheaply. Yet to me, it was very much a squeezed middle brand. So it wasn't at the top like John Lewis, and it wasn't at the bottom like B&M Bargains. It just sort of got stuck in the middle, and it didn't really know what its identity was all about any longer. And I think customers didn't really know what it stood for.
That's interesting, because they started out as a hardware store in Leicester, didn't they? And for years, they, were successful as a hardware provider. And then they seemed to try out Woolworths after Woolworths had gone.
Yeah, and I think that is part of the problem with Wilko's, is that if you asked anybody on the street and say, what actually is your perception of Wilko's, what do they stand for, what do they sell, people wouldn't say hardware, they wouldn't say paint, they would be like, oh, I'm not really sure. So they would say, oh, perhaps it's all about shampoo, perhaps it's all about gardening, perhaps it's all about confectionery. And I think it's a classic case of brands really not sticking to their identity. And if brands don't stick to their identity, then your shopper doesn't know what you stand for. So it's all well and good being able to go in there and, for example, buy shampoo cheaper than anywhere else, but that's actually not what the heart of the brand was all about. So therefore, customers and shoppers get a very mixed message about what Wilko was all about. And it's sad, because of all those people the 12,000 people who are going to lose their jobs. But for me, it's very much about understand what you stand for and do it well. Because if you understand as a retail business what you stand for, then that makes it much easier for your customer to understand what you stand for.
How do you help businesses do that?
Well, we talk to your customers. So we are a market research agency. When people think market research, they always think people on the street with a clipboard, and market research isn't like that at all. It's
very annoying as well.
And market research isn't like that at all. It's a very sophisticated business. I reckon, Johnathan, if I opened most company accounts, if I opened or looked at the mission statement of most companies, they would say, our mission is to put the customer, the consumer, at the heart of our business. But you can't just say that without doing it. And what our job is to do is to really understand what the customer thinks, feels, perceives about your brand. And as a research agency, I work for some of the biggest brands across the world. And that's why they're successful. Because if you don't benchmark against what your competitors are doing, if you don't track how aware people are of your brand, if you don't understand what bonds somebody to your brand, then actually you're going to be in a Wilko situation. Not now, but probably in about 5 or 10 years' time.
That's very interesting. One of the things I do with my clients is I help them calculate sustainable competitive advantage, which is all about exploding the myth of we put the customer first. To really test that, it's very important that the customer is first, but it's making sure that the customer's first, isn't it?
Yes.
And making really, really sure that you're delivering what they really, really want.
Yes. And often the customer will say, I want this or I want that. And market research isn't a strategy. You don't do what the customer always tells you to do. What market research is a piece of business intelligence. So you can decide, well, that's fine, I'm going to go in this direction, or you can decide, actually, that's not my strategy, so I'm going to sacrifice that. But if you don't understand what your customer is thinking about you as a brand, as a retail outlet, then you can't make those decisions. You can't do it on gut feel. You can't say, well, I think the customer thinks this, because actually you don't know. Unless you speak to a market research agency, a professional, then you're never going to understand that.
But isn't that part of the principle of you don't know what you don't know?
Absolutely. And also, you need to speak to different customers, because you may bet that actually Wilko is probably talking a lot to its loyal customers who are all saying, you're amazing, Wilko, you're amazing, of which they were. But actually, you need to talk to your lapsed customers, people who perhaps haven't been into that shop for a couple of months, or you need to talk to people who've never been into that shop. Because actually, the principles of marketing are keep your loyal customers close to you, but actually brands grow because of light buyers. And when I talk about light buyers, I mean people who perhaps only buy Coke once or twice a month. They've got their core group of loyal drinkers who might buy Coke every day, but actually brand growth always comes from lighter buyers. And those are the customers that you need to understand.
Wilko as a strategy always stayed in town centres, whereas a lot of their competitors were out of town. They could park right outside. But the digital economy, surely businesses these days have to actually have a digital solution, because we've been through the pandemic, and during the pandemic, if you like, there was a massive boom, and some of that surely stuck, hasn't it? Yeah. It's really convenient.
Yes, totally. But also what we would say as a research agency is changing context changes everything. So can I give you an example of that in the Wilko space? If you think about your loyal customers to Wilko, they are people who probably like to drive into a town centre, park, get out, wander around. But now, if you think about the context of where Wilko was operating in, suddenly you've got town councils putting up the price of car parking or moving to using credit cards rather than using cash. Changing context has therefore changed actually how people use that store. So there's a lot of contextual factors which are changing how people think about my brand. I therefore need to probably have a digital offer, but I still need to actually have a physical offer, because a lot of my customers like being able to see me. They're not always people who will shop on Amazon. So there is definitely a role for physical retail, but there's also, you need to understand how that physical retail is operating. What's the context in which it's operating? And so therefore, understand which levers to pull on as a brand. So do I pull more on my retail space, or do I pull more on my digital space? I don't think, Johnathan, as a research professional, I don't think it's a binary answer. I don't think it is either do this or do that. It's about both things working together.
But the key is to use your Coca-Cola analogy. If you've got customers that buy Coke every day, those people are going to buy Coke every day kind of almost whatever you do.
Absolutely, yeah.
But the real money shot is going to be to actually capture whatever that margin is.
Yeah.
And that's what that market research will do, is to get those marginal buyers.
Totally, those light buyers. And that's your theory of thrival, because you need to keep your loyal customers closer to you, but brands grow because of light buyers. And we know that. All of the marketing theory tells us that. But as a research professional, I need to understand or help brands, help clients say, okay, so what is the relationship that the brand has with its loyal customers, but equally, what can we do to invite more lighter buyers, those buyers on the periphery? What can we do to encourage more of them to buy the good or service that I'm producing?
So what would sales directors, board directors, chairmen of the board need to do to actually shift the dial in this process? What would be the correct next step for them?
You need to speak to your customers. I mean, basically, you need to do some market research. It's really interesting because every single time we go through a recession, the first thing that gets slashed is marketing. And market research gets slashed in there as well. What happens then is actually you haven't got brand awareness any longer. So you need to be doing brand awareness measures. If you were a CEO saying to me, well, how can market research help? I would say market research can give you that intelligence, give you that piece of the jigsaw that makes you strategically one step in front of your competitors, because that's what it gives you. It reinforces what you already know, but what it will also do is give you a little bit of insight, a little bit of intelligence that actually makes you far more knowledgeable than any of your competitive set.
Which, of course, then makes you resilient.
Yep.
It also helps you manage risk.
Yes.
It also has a benefit because in areas in which you're exposed, you will identify those exposed.
Yeah.
And most importantly at all, it helps you seize your opportunities, which are the four components of our thrival.
Totally. And I'll give you a really good example of that from clients that we've been working with recently. So just been through the pandemic, one of our big clients, basically they make all the sandwiches in this country. So imagine going through the pandemic and 90% of your business goes because nobody wants to buy pre-packed sandwiches any longer. When that happened, they had a project ongoing with us. And it would have been really, really easy for the chief exec to say, no, cancel that market research. Nobody wants to know about how people eat sandwiches nowadays. But he didn't. He carried on with it. And as a result of that, immediately coming out of the pandemic, they had that intelligence to be able to then go to people like Costa, Tesco, Sainsbury's, all of their customers and say, we know more about the sandwich business than anybody else does. And as a result of that, their sales bounced back quicker than any of their competitors, and they were able to flog more pre-packed sandwiches than anybody else in the country. And that's how brands thrive, and that's how brands grow. But they grow because they know what their customers want.
That was really, really useful, I'm sure, for everyone, Debbie. If somebody wants to contact you, how might they go about doing that?
All they have to do, John, is just search for Flume on the internet, and we're there.
Okay. Or if you prefer, you can make contact via myself or your usual Crowe contact. And likewise, if you'd like to know more about the art of thrival and the processes we put in place to help you through the tough times of running a business today, please contact either myself or your usual contact. Thank you very much, Debbie. Thank you all for tuning in.